Hello and welcome to this India Today special. It's now 2 months and counting since the Russian war on Ukraine. Thousands have died, millions have been dislocated, but the fighting shows no sign of ending. Worse still, the Russian leadership is now making threatening noises of a potential third world war and even a nuclear conflict. How is Ukraine then seeing its future as it fights back? Joining us now is a very special guest from Kiev, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. Appreciate you joining us, Mr. Kuleba. As I said at the outset, our sympathies and solidarity with your people who've suffered grievously in the last 2 months. I want to ask you at the very outset, just a few days ago, your Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, suggested that this conflict could turn into World War III, said there was a serious and real risk of a third world war, even had a veiled warning of a nuclear conflict. How do you see that, sir?
Well, first of all, thank you for your words of sympathy. I'm speaking now on behalf of the people of Ukraine to the people of India who support us in these difficult moments. When it comes to Minister Lavrov, well, this is a clear traditional Russian scaremongering, an attempt to blackmail the world and to scare countries who support Ukraine away. To tell to them, if you continue supporting Ukraine, we will resort to the third world war. But it's just a blackmail. No one should be afraid of it. Russia understands it's getting weaker day by day and resorts to these unprecedented threats. And the last point on nuclear weapons. Ukraine has no nuclear weapons. What the West does not intend to use nuclear weapons against Russia. So when Lavrov threatens nuclear war, he literally threatens that Russia will launch the nuclear war. And this will mean an attack on entire humanity.
So you're saying that this is blackmail, that this is just an attempt to scare the world, scare off Ukraine. But do you fear that Russia now wants to escalate the conflict? Or do you believe that the Russians are willing to negotiate?
No, Russia escalates the conflict every day. There is a battle for Donbas underway in eastern Ukraine. Besieged Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are being shelled and bombed every day in Mariupol. Russia hits Ukrainian peaceful cities with cruise missiles every day and night, destroying infrastructure. 3 days ago, in the southern city of Odessa, Russian missile hit an apartment building, and a young mother with her 3-month-old child had been killed. This is what you have to know about Russia's escalation.
So, you know, the Mariupol governor, Mr. Foreign Minister, said the city is being wiped off the face of the earth. How long can Ukrainian forces then resist the Russians if, as you say, the Russians are only escalating the conflict?
Our soldiers in Mariupol, they defend their land, but they also defend women and children, including infants, who found safe haven with them in this at this Azovstal factory. So they have the double duty to defend the country, but also to defend innocent lives. And we are doing our best to help them. We are using diplomatic channels. We worked with the UN Secretary General on this. So hopefully we will be ready. We will be able to save their lives.
What is the biggest challenge, though, Mr. Foreign Minister, that your troops are facing on the ground? What is the biggest challenge as this Russian relentless bombardment continues in Mariupol and across eastern Ukraine?
The real answer is relentless bombarding. Russia brought thousands of pieces of heavy weapons to the east of Ukraine to engage them in the battle for Donbas. And our positions, they are being shelled day and night, 24/7, from all kinds of artillery. Some villages and towns, less visible than Mariupol, in Donbas, do not exist anymore because Russia razed them to the ground with their artillery fire. The way they conduct warfare is beyond humanity. It's beyond the international laws that regulate how the war should be conducted. It's a barbarian way to fight.
Are you saying, therefore, in your view, Vladimir Putin and the Russian leadership are war criminals? What they did in Bucha, they're now doing, you're saying, in other parts also? Because Putin was quoted as saying that this was provocation. Bucha is not what you make it out to be.
Russia will bear responsibility for the war crimes and crimes against humanity, and also the crime of genocide committed in the territory of Ukraine. I want you to think about one number. In the vicinity, in the suburb of Kiev, our law enforcement bodies have already discovered 1,084 bodies of civilians. 75% of them had been shot, directly shot. They did not die because of the bomb blowing up next to them or because they were hit in other accidents. They were deliberately shot by the Russian soldiers. Many, they had their hands tied behind their back and they were shot in the back of their head. So these were deliberate crimes. And we will do our utmost to bring everyone accountable, everyone who was involved in committing these crimes to account. And this involves not only the soldier who actually pulled the trigger, but the entire chain of command. And if we prove, and this chain of command will lead to the leadership of Russia.
So you're very clear, in your view, Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and the Russian army has killed innocent civilians in Kiev, in Mariupol, in Bucha, and across Ukraine. Am I correct?
Well, President Putin ordered the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Aggression is also a crime under international law. So in that sense, he clearly committed that crime as president of Russia. And as I said, I represent a democratic country governed by the rule of law. So when investigators identify all the evidence and we build this chain of command from the soldier who committed the crime to the leadership of Russia, we will accuse them of committing these war crimes also.
May I ask you though then, Mr. Foreign Minister, if you believe that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and that the Russian army is killing civilians, that this was an unprovoked aggression, then what stops you? Why are you so confident that Russia will not escalate it into a nuclear conflict? Because Vladimir Putin has from time to time hinted at it. Lavrov has given a veiled warning. Why are you so confident that the Russians are only blackmailing the world by using the word nuclear?
Because Russia clearly understands that the nuclear war launched by Moscow will mean the end of Moscow. We live on a planet and some red lines have to be kept for the sake of survival of entire humanity. And nuclear potentials of Russia and the West are uncomparable. So this is really not the line that anyone would wish to cross. I cannot dig into Putin's mind, but if he has the remains of reason and wisdom, then he should understand that resorting to nuclear weapons will mean the end of Russia. And one last point that I want to make in this regard: Russia is an artist. Russia knows how to perfectly blackmail the world. We have observed it in recent years. So the last thing we should do now is to buy Russia's scaremongering and blackmail. We have to remain confident, we have to remain united, and I know that India enjoys special relationship with Russia, but one clear point should be taken into account. This Russia, the Russia that we are all dealing with, is different from the one India was developing its special relationship with. This Russia destroys, kills, tortures, rapes, and manipulates. So and more importantly, this Russia is in strategic decline. So I hope that the Indian leadership will thoroughly analyze the current situation and the strategic development of this situation, and will stand on the right side of history.
Let me build on that point that you've just made, Foreign Minister. What would you like, therefore, India to do? Because India says, this is not a war we started. We've had, as you said, a special relationship with Russia. We have a good relationship with Ukraine. We want to stay neutral. We do not want to be seen to be taking one side. We want the wars to stop. That's what the Indian Prime Minister has said. We want the fighting to stop. We want peace to return. What would you like India to do more beyond that?
We appreciate the sympathy coming from the leadership of India to Ukraine. We also appreciate the position of India that the war must stop. At the same time, I cannot but mention that under these circumstances, neutrality is the position that doesn't help stopping the war. The best way to stop the war is to support Ukraine and to leave Russia with no illusions that it may win the war, because other countries will either stay neutral, not get involved in it, or somehow will support Russia. So in my view, in a situation when you have an obvious criminal and a victim of his crime, it's a moral and politically wise duty to be on the side of the victim.
So what you're saying is India should isolate Russia totally. You know that India is dependent on Russia for defense equipment. We have strong ties, economic ties, oil, gas, energy. You're saying isolate Russia completely because India will turn around and say, look, the same Western nations that call for sanctions continue, parts of Europe continue to deal for their energy needs with Russia. So you're calling for a total isolation of Russia. India will turn around and say, well, the West must also walk the talk on that, Mr. Foreign Minister.
Well, the West is not only talking the talk about the isolation of Russia, it's also walking the walk. It has done a lot so far. My second point is that India is a big democratic country. And it would be more than natural for India to stand by democracies in this struggle, because the war between Russia and Ukraine is also a war between democratic world and an authoritarian regime. So I think it would be the most natural choice for India to stand by democracies, not by the other side. When it comes to military cooperation, according to the information that I possess, Russia is not as reliable supplier of defense equipment to India as one might think. There are many issues related to it. And then be pragmatic, look at the battlefield. Ukraine effectively destroys the most advanced Russian weapons on the battleground. So the question is it really in the interests of India to buy weapons which do not survive on the battleground from an army not as advanced as the Russian one? And finally, trade and economic relations. India is a global power. India has future in the world. India is on the rise. Russia is in decline. Choosing the right trade partners, strategic trade partners, is something that will make India even stronger. Yes, you have to reorient some of your trade flows, you have to find alternative suppliers of oil and other commodities, but leaders always have to think strategically. And there is no place for strong Russia in the future. Russia is getting weaker and weaker.
Let me ask you though, Mr. Foreign Minister, the end game. Because the fact is, there is no clarity on how all of this is going to end. It's 2 months and counting. The Russians are continuing with their bombardment. US military aid to Ukraine has gone up to over 3 billion. There have been sanctions imposed, and yet Russia is not being deterred. In fact, there is a belief that Mr. Putin has said May 9th as the deadline by which he wants to win the war. That was the anniversary of the Russian defeat of Nazi Germany. Do you see any of this being a deterrent, whether India does it or the West does it? Is there any deterrent for someone like Mr. Putin? What is the end game, Mr. Foreign Minister?
The end game is the victory of Ukraine. I have no doubts in that, and I cannot even suggest an alternative scenario, because if Ukraine loses this war, Ukraine will cease to exist. And I would like to remind that for many years, Ukraine has been a good friend of India. We had excellent trade. Our exports of sunflower oil now blocked by the Russian aggression and Russian mines in the Black Sea. These exports to India were flourishing and increasing from year to year. Indian students, they were an integral part of Ukrainian society, and we very much appreciated them becoming a part of our country. So all this was destroyed by the Russian aggression, and we have to restore it. Together, if we join efforts, we will. We want to continue building democratic Ukraine, open to the world, trading with all nations. Yes, there are moments in history when you have to make tough decisions, to reorient your economy, to choose the right partners. And I think that the moment for that has come. I respect the Indian government, Indian sovereignty. They are free to make their decisions in the way they understand national security interests of India. But I hope my interview helped to clarify what is the right direction in which decisions should be made.
You know, you're making very important points, Mr. Foreign Minister. You're also saying the end game must be the victory of Ukraine. You're calling it a victory of democracy over authoritarianism. However, when we interviewed the Russian Foreign Minister, Mr. Lavrov, he seemed to suggest that the plan was to free up eastern and southern Ukraine, especially the Donbass region over which Russia is claiming control, and then have referendums and virtually free up Ukraine and divide your country as a result. Do you believe that that is a real threat? Do you see that again as just Russian bravado, or do you believe they could actually slice your country apart as they are claiming and pound eastern and southern Ukraine and claim that they are now independent?
Well, I would like to recall that the initial plan of the Russian war against Ukraine was to capture Kiev and celebrate victory in at least 3 days. Now we are in the third month of war, and Russia is contained in the east and in the south of Ukraine, while we won the critical battle for Kiev. So Russia can make its own plans, but we have ours, and we know how to implement them. However, I have to be very clear and honest about it. I represent a country at war, a country that suffers from war crimes and immense destruction of our economy. And under these circumstances, when countries prefer to stay neutral in this situation, it means only one thing. Ukraine will still win, but at a much higher cost. Standing by Ukraine, not choosing neutrality, would mean that Ukraine will win, saving many more lives of civilians, saving many more cities and villages from being destroyed, and preventing more atrocities as the ones committed by Russia and Bucha and elsewhere. So I call on everyone to be very pragmatic under these circumstances and analyze the picture in full. The easiest thing is to be neutral, but thinking 1-2 steps ahead, I think it's clear that it makes much more sense to take the right side and to be on the right side of history.
But when you say right side of history, I would like to ask you, Mr. Foreign Minister, are you looking for more military aid? Are you looking for feet on the ground? Do you want NATO to get involved? Because that could then escalate it into a third world war as the Russians are threatening. Are you looking at, what are you specifically looking at that you believe will end this war quickly? Because otherwise, we seem to be heading for a prolonged conflict, Mr. Foreign Minister, with the Russians not backing off just yet.
I would like again to remind you that this war began in 2014 with Russia illegally annexing Crimea and launching the war in Donbass. Never, not a single time since 2014, Ukraine asked for foreign boots on the ground. This makes Ukraine very different from other countries in the world who cannot fight themselves and ask foreign countries to step in and do the fighting for them. We are not like them. We know how to fight. We have very committed soldiers. We know how to win. We do not ask anyone to fight for us. But the fair deal that we are offering to the entire world is simple. You provide Ukraine with everything that we need to fight, meaning weapons, meaning sanctions, meaning political isolation of Russia, and we will do the rest of the job. We will fight, we will win.
But you've lost, millions of Ukrainians have had their homes destroyed, 5 million leaving the country. How long can Ukraine fight? It's quite remarkable how you've stood up to the Russians, but how long can you hold on, in your view, Mr. Foreign Minister?
Again, on the eve of the war, in the very last days preceding the war, there were very few countries in the world who believed that Ukraine would win. Even our closest friends, they had doubts Ukraine would sustain the pressure. And we are in the third month of war. We stopped the second largest army in the world. I want to make it clear. And the last point, let me return this question to you. What if someone attacks India? How long will you be able to sustain? How long are you going to fight? I'm sure you will fight until the end, until you prevail, because you fight for your country, for your land, for your people. This is exactly the feeling that we have. We want this war to come to an end as quickly as possible, but this end will not be the defeat of Ukraine. It will be the victory of Ukraine.
That's the question I want to end with, Mr. Foreign Minister, because what the world has been stunned by is the resilience your forces have shown, the bravery of your leadership. Mr. Zelenskyy is now a world figure. Your leadership, what is it? What is it that is keeping Ukraine going in the face of the fact that the Russians have a much stronger army, much larger personnel? They are the aggressors. They believed they could do in Ukraine, presumably what they did in Crimea in 2014. What has kept Ukraine going for the last 2 months, despite the suffering of your people?
Three things. First, it's the right cause that we are fighting for. When you fight for the right cause, you spend all of your energy and you sacrifice yourself to win. This is not the case with the Russian soldiers, because they don't understand what they are fighting for in Ukraine. The second is President Zelenskyy. His leadership and his personal courage and his commitment and energy, they inspired Ukrainians, but also it will be true to say that they inspired the entire world. And the third reason why we are fighting is because we are Ukrainians. We defend our land, our freedom.
May I ask you at a personal level, what's been the most difficult thing for you to deal with in the last couple of months? You know, the Ukrainian people, as you said, are industrious, hardworking people. You have a fertile soil. You suddenly find your lives uprooted, disrupted, bombs falling on your country. What for you at a personal level, Mr. Foreign Minister, has been the biggest challenge in the last 2 months?
Seeing pictures and hearing stories from Bucha about all the war crimes committed by the Russians. This was the moment when I could hardly control my emotions. I'm a foreign minister. I'm always focused on diplomacy and diplomatic solutions. But that was the moment when I was ready to stand up, take arms, go and kill for all the sufferings and all the tortures, all the pain inflicted on my people. And it took me a lot of effort to suppress these emotions and to recommit myself to finding a diplomatic solution. Trust me, it's not easy to speak, for example, with Minister Lavrov, knowing that his hands are in blood, covered with blood of Ukrainian citizens, or that because of the aggression he supports, girls, boys were raped numerous times by the Russian soldiers, and the lives of these boys and girls were destroyed forever. It's not easy. It's emotionally extremely challenging, but we will be moving forward.
Right. Given that, is peace possible? Given what you've just told me, are peace talks possible? Is it possible to get peace, a peaceful resolution in the next month?
Every war ends with a peace. There are only two questions: the timeline and the terms of the peace. And as I said, I'm doing my best, and all of us are doing everything that we can to bring peace closer and to make it on our terms, on the terms of the country that fights a just war defending itself.
Mr. Foreign Minister, you've taken the time off to speak to us. You've given us a very strong message there from Kiev. As I said, our sympathies and solidarity with the suffering of your people. And for now, I really appreciate you joining us here on India Today. Thank you so much, Mr. Dmytro Kuleba, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine.
Thank you.